Okay, well, let's jump in. I want to welcome you to this special online event. This is part of our ongoing Take Action series. And today's event is From Art to Action, How Beauty Can Inspire Us to Protect What We Love, with our guests, Chris Jordan and Jenny Price. I'm Rob Dietz, the program director of the Post-Carbon Institute. I absolutely love my job because I get to do things like this event with these people. Of course, it takes a team to bring you something like this. So I want to acknowledge Desiree Cesarini, Amy Burringrud, and Clara Winter. These are my colleagues here at Post-Carbon who provide so much behind the scenes help for this kind of event. I also want to thank all of you who have joined us in the audience today. You are the ones who support our work. And I really hope this event will inspire you to try some different things in the challenge that we all face in trying to achieve a sustainable society. And of course, I want to thank Jenny Price and Chris Jordan for being with us today to share their insights and experiences in using art and creativity to fight for the places and things they love. More about these two characters in a few moments, but first I want to let you know the outline for this conversation. I'm going to give Jenny a few minutes to introduce her work and talk about what she's thinking about these days, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who is also going to have a few minutes to discuss and share. And then we're going to dive into a question and answer session. Hopefully you'll get more of a sense of how these two think and work. And if you have questions that you'd like to ask, please type those in the Q&A box. I cannot promise that I'll be able to get to all of them, but even if we can't, it's really great to see the sorts of questions that arise, and I think that makes it richer and helps people think more and have a richer set of ideas coming out of this event. We'll also have a few closing thoughts when we get to the end of our 75 minutes together. And after that conclusion, we'll send you a list of resources, artists and organizations that engage in creative ways of supporting environmental and social goals. Maybe that will help you if you feel inspired to go out and do some cool things too. And along with those resources, we're going to have a survey. If you can, please take a minute or two to fill that out. Really helps us understand how to bring you the content that's most helpful. Okay. So without further ado, let me introduce Jenny, have you go, and then I'll introduce you, Chris, and have you go. So Jenny Price is the author of Stop Saving the Planet, an Environmentalist Manifesto, a public writer and artist who works passionately on environmental justice. She is co-founder of the public art collective LA Urban Rangers, co-creator of the popular Our Malibu Beaches phone app, and author of 13 Ways of Seeing Nature in LA. She's currently a research fellow at the Sam Fox School at Washington University in St. Louis. And I had the good fortune of interviewing Jenny a few months ago on our Crazy Town podcast. And I found someone who is caring, funny, courageously willing to stick her neck out in wonderfully creative ways. I don't mean to embarrass you, but I got a quote from the book, Jenny. It says, "You can't overstate the power of the arts to see, know, reimagine, communicate, challenge deep-rooted assumptions, make visible what's invisible, and actively make change happen. So read, look, watch, listen, and go creative, solo and with others." So please, Jenny, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rob. Really, really pleased to be here. Really pleased to see everybody on Zoom. And I don't think I need to say anything. Basically, you just took the money quote out of the book. But I am going to show you my work just a little bit. I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible because I know we all want to have a lot of discussion. So Desiree, I think you're going to show a video for me just to start out.
So before we begin ranging the wilds of our urban habitat today, I'd like to ask, Do any of you here today have any previous experience in urban mountaineering?
The ascent up Bunker Hill and back is 1¼ miles. We're going to traverse canyons, caves, switchbacks, meadows, passes, and peaks. What else do you see?
My bank.
Your bank. What's your bank?
US Bank.
US Bank. What else do you see?
Look, Citibank.
Citibank. We're now in Banker Canyon. Okay?
Welcome to McGuire Garden. This is really a refuge or an oasis nestled deep in the Banker Canyons.
It's what? Public. Most people seem to think this is public, McGuire Gardens.
What do we mean by the term public space?
Does this look like public space?
How about this?
That meadow is public land with a private lease, with a public easement on the private lease, with private security and maintenance.
Often what's public and what's private in these spaces is really, really complicated, and you can't always tell.
In essence, we use this de facto as a public space, but we really don't have as many rights here.
Does this look like public space?
Well, this is a very special location because this is one of the few places where we can actually get under the undergrowth of infrastructure that separates the LA River from downtown Los Angeles. So savor this space. It's a special one. Let's walk down towards the river. Los Angeles exists because of the LA River. For 130 years, the river was the sole source of water for the citizens of Los Angeles. So the river is absolutely linked to Los Angeles, its culture, and its people. According to the city, in order to be in this space, you technically need to have a waiver. Access to the river is so important. We can't appreciate the river until we actually can be at the river. So the more work we can do to get folks down to the river, see the river, experience the river, the better.
We hope you go forth from this hike, understanding that while the various landscapes we encounter on a daily basis largely shape our behavior, that we too can play an active role in shaping our cities.
So the LA Urban Rangers, that was just a couple of minutes showing you our Public Access 101 Downtown LA project. And I do, in general, I do a lot of projects in a lot of different formats, solo, collaborative, but a lot of my work has been to kind of swim against this idea, which I think is extremely troublesome, of this deeply American idea of thinking about nature and environment as something that's out there. And a lot of my work is really trying to show that, in fact, our lives are foundationally environmental. We use environments to live. We inhabit environments as landscapes and ecosystems, and trying to make those connections visible and insist on that, because you cannot take responsibility for connections that you refuse to see. So that's what a lot of my work is in general. I've done a lot of work on the LA River. Everybody knows the LA River, even if you think you don't. It's a really extreme example of making nature invisible, because this is a river that basically a city that has a river that flows right through it. And it's actually the reason that Los Angeles exists, basically forgot that it has a river for a very long time. And but the river is still there. It's still really important in many ways. And concreting the river is deeply implicated in pretty much every problem that you can think of that Los Angeles has. And I won't go into that because I want to keep this super brief. And a lot of people right now are trying to revitalize it. So one of the LA Urban Rangers projects, which you saw in that silent movie version, is we had an LA River Ramble. I should say this is a project, LA Urban Rangers, that was founded in 2004. The founders are me, Emily Scott, Therese Kelly, and Sarah DeLayden. This is our LA River Ramble. You can see that all of our materials mimic National Park materials. And basically what we did, this was actually for MoCA, Missouri, Museum of Contemporary Art. And we basically took people down to the river, hundreds of people one night, and we basically allowed people to experience the LA River as a river and as a major public space, which actually we had not done, people have not been doing for many, many decades. The LA River is actually really swarming with artists. The project, which is now a huge public project to revitalize the river, was actually started by artists, which I think is really, really telling, because I think that say take a problem like climate change. I don't think we're going to be able to tackle climate change without artists. I don't think we can do it with Teslas and carbon capture and really, really bad, uncourageous public policies that have no vision. And I think that one of the superpowers that artists have is to actually make the invisible visible. So it's not surprising that they've been really involved on the LA River. And that's essentially what a lot of my work does, is I try to really challenge, get people to rethink their deeply rooted assumptions about environment and economy, and also public and private space, and just really turn those upside down. So I just talked really briefly about a couple of my favorite tools for doing that. We have superpowers, we can't fly, but there are other things that we can do. So I really like to use mimicry. Not all my projects, but a lot of my projects use mimicry and irony. And you can see already, the LA Urban Rangers is sort of chock full of both. So I just want to end by talking a little bit about mimicry and irony. Here's another project that's a nature trail in Laumeier Sculpture Park that stops at a few unusual stops like the power lines. And what you do is you're mimicking this very, very familiar genre of the nature trail, and then taking all the familiar meanings that people bring to that and just like totally screwing around with them, right? And saying that actually these landscapes, it's not just this beautiful park without people, which is what people see, but actually this landscape has a history, and it's actually powerfully shaped not only by that history, but by the kind of incredibly inequitable environmental and racial geographies in St. Louis. And so the nature trail, as you go around, I think there were 15, 18 stops, I don't remember now, kind of talks about those narratives and tries to make those narratives visible. Obviously, the LA Urban Rangers is a project of mimicry. And what we do is, when I'm Ranger Jenny and I put on that hat, we just use all those meanings and assumptions that people immediately bring to that character, right? So, what do you see? What do you think of when you see that hat? A ranger, you are an expert on nature, and you are the guardian of America's great public spaces. So it turns out to be a wonderful character for totally screwing around with how people think about nature and define it, and for challenging, public spaces like the Malibu public beaches that people have tried to privatize for many, many decades. Okay, and through the LA Urban Rangers, which was I became really, really interested in what I call these alt institution projects. A lot of people, you probably know the Yes Men. I really love like US Department of Arts and Culture. There's a lot of artists out there doing this. That's just enjoying the beaches. Here's a project that's about to come online, probably by Earth Day, hopefully, called Super Fun. And it looks exactly, we hope, like the EPA website, which we call the Environment Plus People Agency. This is a collaboration with Alana Ross and Aaron Owens. And it's basically, the purpose is to show just how much our economy requires massive everyday toxicity, and to really, again, just turn around, just completely jumble up the assumptions that you might bring to what Superfund is. I'll just end really quickly. I think with irony, obviously these mimicry projects require a lot of irony. And I think with irony, you can kind of tell two stories at once. So you're not just telling new stories when you put on that hat, you're actually telling the old stories as well, and sort of troubling them. At the same time, kind of pointing to new ways that we can think about economy and environment and nature and public space. And I'll just wrap up by saying that, do I have any more? Oh, there we go. Just wrap up by saying that I think that the lack of irony in environmentalism is actually incredibly dangerous. This kind of super seriousness, this greener than thou-ness that we all know about, this inability to have a sense of humor, because if you can't appreciate irony, you cannot think in complex ways, right? And you cannot challenge your most deeply rooted assumptions, which we desperately need to do right now. And you cannot think differently. So I'm just ending with my book, which I think will be a good segue to Chris. It's a very hot-headed book. It's a very angry book, but it's about, it really uses fun and play to be a very angry look at how, at really insisting that environmentalists, that we really need to think completely differently about the causes and solutions for environmental problems right now, whether it's you or me or my Uncle Tim or Exxon or the EPA. We just keep doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on solutions that have not worked for decades, and we just keep doing them, and we are out of time, and we have to think differently, we have to think anew, and we have to do it now. So hopefully, Chris, I hope that'll be a good segue to to what you have to say. And
yeah, thanks, Jenny. I really appreciate the insights and lots of aha things to pull from just that short introduction. And I apologize for the lack of sound in the video, but I hope I saw Clara sent the link out to it, so folks hopefully will get a chance to watch. It's a really cool little video. Okay, Chris Jordan's work explores the collective shadow of contemporary mass culture from a variety of photographic and conceptual perspectives, edge walking the lines between beauty and horror, abstraction and representation, the near and the far, the visible and the invisible. Chris's images confront the enormous power of humanity's collective will, and his works get exhibited and published worldwide. And I also want to say, Chris, in getting to know you a little bit, I find you to be super kind-hearted, thoughtful, and a thought-provoking human being. And again, not to embarrass, but I got a little quote from your talk on Can Beauty Save Our Planet, where you said that every living being, whether it's a plant or an animal at any scale, is an incomprehensibly complex and magnificent artwork. So thanks for being here, wow. Chris, the floor is yours.
Oh, well, hi, you guys. Hi, Rob. And thank you, Jenny. That was awesome. So good to connect with what you're up to. Always so inspiring. What I thought I would do just in my short amount of time, I kind of want to get through my talk as fast as possible because the real juice is going to be in the conversation and in the questions from the audience. So I'm going to speak really briefly, and I'm not going to show any photographs. Maybe it's wrong of me to assume that people have seen these photos before, but the one photograph that I want you guys to know that I took is a picture that you've probably seen before of a bird whose body is filled with plastic on a remote island in the Pacific Ocean. And that photograph and that project kind of blew up in 2009 when I first published that work. And it's given me a front row seat in the environmental conversation around the world ever since. And what I have to report from those years is it's kind of a horror story that I find myself in the middle of, because what I see out there is the world of environmental activism and kind of environmental advocacy is stuck in a profoundly broken paradigm. And it's one that we can fix. So I don't want to only point at the bad news, but here are some of the ways that I see that it's broken. And the primary way is just in the energy of most environmental messaging. It's this kind of almost religious level of righteous shaming and blaming, and we're bad, and just sort of a blah energy coming from people who are highly respected public figures. It's sort of like our indignant grandma at our bedroom door going, "You need to clean up your room, blah, blah." And it's an energy that has been used by thousands of different people in thousands of different ways and sort of amplified into this ball of terribleness that if there's one thing we can say about it, having arrived at this point right now, is that it didn't work. And the best evidence I have for that is, why isn't everybody an environmentalist? We should all be environmentalists. Like, if you check the box, are you an environmentalist? That should be 99.9% of people. And it's actually strangely still a kind of almost fringe movement. And that to me it's a testament to our collective failure in how we present our message to the public. And one of the ways that sort of dark energy comes out is in this thing that we call doomsday environmentalism, which is always using words like catastrophe and disaster and apocalypse. First it was global warming, and then it was climate change, and then it was climate disruption, and then it was climate destruction. And now the word used by scientists And the New York Times is the climate apocalypse. Such a strange word when you think about it. It's the word in the English language that it's a biblical term for the destruction of the entire world by fire. Like this cataclysmic word that we use for a long-term, incredibly complex problem that's going to be here for all the rest of our lives and the lives of the next 20 generations. And we know from neuroscience, neuroscientists are telling us that in a state of fear, the mind, our neocortex, literally loses the ability to think. And the last thing we should be doing as environmentalists is amplifying collective fear and advocating for people to be in a state of fear, and even many of the best known environmentalists are advocating for us to be in a state of panic, which is the most acute form of fear. It's the worst possible response to any situation ever, is panic. So that's one way that our conversation is just so broken. And then there's the calls to action, you know, the 30 minutes of giving all the terribly bad news and terrible charts and graphs that are all going vertical. And at the very end, what can you do about it? You can pump up your car tires to their full pressure when you go on a road trip and change your light bulbs. And to me, that whole paradigm is so broken, and we all sense it. We all know how broken that whole conversation is, that it's a monument to disempowerment. The subtitle of that whole conversation is, we're all disempowered and we're afraid to face that and acknowledge that together. And then it's the putting the entire responsibility to change the whole world on each individual person. And there's a terrible trap involved in that, which is that it causes a kind of apathy, because people are afraid if they won't do a basic thing because it isn't going to save the whole world. It's like, why even bother picking up plastic on the beach? That's not going to change the global plastic problem. Why bother doing anything because I make such a tiny difference? And the example that I love on that subject is, think about when we pet a dog. I'm a dog lover, and there are tons of dogs where I am here in Chile, just street dogs living wild. And I love going and petting them all. And every time I pet a dog, I don't think to myself, I'm healing the entire world of dog loving, or I'm making some global difference. And you can see how ridiculous it would be if I said, I'm not going to pet that dog because it won't make a difference to the entire humanity dog culture. We pet a dog, we know it's a personal, individual, momentary act of love. And there's no connection between that and the global issue. And we don't have to take on the responsibility as individuals for solving all of these global problems. Let's see. So those are just a few of the ways that I see that our conversation is so broken. It's talking about solutions in the absence of deeper connection, emotional connection, spiritual connection with the things that we're talking about. And that's really where I believe that the arts have such a tremendous power. And exactly as Jenny said, we're not gonna save our world. We're not gonna make forward progress without the arts. And my belief right now is I'm at a place where I'm turning away from all of that kind of dark, bad news messaging. And I believe, like, we can't leave behind the bad news. We have to stay connected with it. We have to keep our eyes on it. It's just that isn't the whole story. There's another side of the story that we've kind of forgotten the tremendous power of, and that is the incredible beauty that's all around us all the time in every moment. And I don't mean beauty that's like way over there in a national park. It's the beauty of the fact that each one of us is alive in the first place. Like, have you ever just had the experience of going, oh my God, I'm alive? You wake up in the morning and be like, oh, here I am again. I'm still here. And the very experience of our consciousness, of our being aware, is a complete mystery. It's the greatest mystery in all of science, is that we're even here in the first place. And we can cultivate a connection with that and with the incomprehensibly amazing complexity of the world around us. Every plant, every fruit fly in our kitchen is another little miracle to be like, oh my God, look at that. And if we can bring that into our environmental messaging and contribute to a kind of new, very realistic, very practical form of spirituality, which is just being in love with life, being in love with each other and with our world, then that can become part of a more hopeful, more inspiring, more luminous kind of environmental messaging. And that's kind of all that I'm up to at the moment. And it's a direction, it's a conversation that I wish that we could foster on a much bigger level.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Chris. So much to unpack already from what both of you have opened with. I want to pull on a little thread here, because you both hit a topic in what you were saying about the ability to think and how important that is. Jenny, you were talking about it, like the perspective of, if you can't understand irony, it probably means you're not thinking broadly enough or big enough about the issues. And Chris, you talked about how if you're in a state of fear, your neocortex is not functioning at a level to give you the higher thinking that's needed for the challenges that we face. I wonder if the two of you can talk more about how the work you're doing, the art that you've been involved in, the creative works that you've been working on, how is that helping people get into that place of thinking that we need them to get into? And you don't have to just talk about your own stuff too. You can talk about what else you see out there.
Chris, you want to start?
Sure. Really interesting question, Rob. My own view of it is I'm always trying to get away from thinking, but maybe it's just a matter of definition. Is, to me, the missing piece in our culture, in our world right now, is not an ability to think, it's an ability to feel. That's what we're losing contact with. And what I believe is the right, when we're in deep connection with our own self, when we're in a state of love, when we're home, our consciousness is not in the mind, it's in our heart. That's the home of where our consciousness ought to be. And that's not something that comes from me. That comes from 2,000 years of the Buddhists and the yogis. It's an incredibly deep piece of wisdom. And what is happening over a long time is our consciousness is moving away from the heart on a collective level, and it's now in the brain or in the mind. And right now it seems to be moving into the place where fear propagates in our mind, which is the amygdala. And you can even see that we are starting to project our consciousness out of our mind into our devices. And suddenly this world in the device is becoming kind of the locus of our experience. And the further we get away from being heart-centered, the further we are away from our connection with the world, which is our feelings. That's what feelings are. That's what connects us with other phenomena, with other beings. And to me, that's the great power of art, is to invite us back into that space of feeling our anger and feeling our rage and our sadness and our disappointment and our joy and our love. Like, that's where our power resides.
That's great, Chris. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna do the nerdy answer, the nerdier answer. So I think they'll complement each other nicely, and just say that I think that we have to think differently, right? So we have to completely redefine. I mean, some of the most basic. I'll just stick to American culture. Some of our most basic assumptions about what environment is, about how an economy works, I think are just completely bizarre, and are completely counterproductive. And we have to turn those around. And it's very, very difficult to do because most people don't even ask those questions, right? What is environment? Or how is our economy supposed to work? They just assume, well, this is how an economy works, so we have to work within the system. But if we try to work within an economy that basically ignores social and environmental costs and impoverishes most people and is inherently incredibly inequitable, which is what we have now, we will never, ever, ever, ever be able to do anything about climate change or plastics or toxics or species loss or anything like that. So again, I use irony. I wrote a book called Stop Saving the Planet. So I try to say things where people will go, what? What are you talking about? Stop saving the planet? What? How, where you like, should I buy a Hummer? It's obviously not what I'm saying, right? But so I try to use that. And because I sort of, with this book, I realized, because I have been trying to change people's ideas about environment my entire career. And it's so difficult because I would say Americans' ideas about nature are probably the most deeply rooted assumptions that they have. It's very, very difficult to change. So finally, I just wrote sort of an angry, provocative manifesto style book where I'm like, okay, I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm just trying to provoke you, to think differently. So I just say things like, I say, saving the environment, talking about environmental solutions as saving the environment is not helpful if you want to save anything at all. I say the question, what can I do, which has dominated environmentalism and which Chris referred to, has actually been more of a problem than helpful. And it's not a bad question, but we have to completely redefine how we think about that question. What can I do? So I'm just trying to push against, like, take people's words, do the opposite of what academics do who invent a new language to think differently, right? Take our language and just use it really differently. So I'll just end with, like, I think one of the things that I say is that what to do about climate change is actually not that important a question, right? Like, that's not the important question. Americans are so practical. Like, I've written most of my works about how people think. They're like, okay, you got to tell us what to do. You can't just tell us how to think, right? And I'm like, so what should we do? I'm like, well, think differently, because the problem is, like, we know what to do. Rob, you and I have talked about this, right? We know what to do. The answers are out there. It's not a mystery. We know how to do regenerative agriculture. We know how to create a more equitable economy. New Zealand has GDP based on, this is not a mystery. Like, we have decades and decades of both literature and models for what to do. And the real question, I think, and again, this is like turning people's questions upside down. What should we do about climate change? What should we do about climate change? Why aren't we doing it is the question. Like, that's the question. Like, just stop obsessing about what we should do about climate change, because that's not the problem. Like, we have those solutions. And the real problem is, why aren't we doing it? And the answers to that have everything to do with how we think about environment and economy. So it's hard, though. It's hard. I mean, I just sort of took a swing for the fences with this book and wrote a book that is in a voice that I never thought I would write a book in. It's like a very fish shaking, hopefully fun, but fish shaking voice, because I'm just like, I'm at the end of my rope. I'm like, how do I actually change how people think? Because I just don't see a future that I'm sorry, I'm going to be apocalyptic here, Chris, a future that my nephews can inhabit, that my friends' kids, my cousins' kids will be able to inhabit unless we actually start asking different questions. That was a little bit long. But.
Yeah, no, please, the insights are really wonderful. And we have some questions prepared, but I'm not following any of them because I'm hearing your answers and then wanting to tug on these other threads that you're bringing up. I mean, the two of you have both talked about maybe starting in a place where you're noticing some things that are what's the word, badly screwed up, or where we as people have overexploited or used something or done something in a way that is incredibly damaging. You brought up the example of the LA River, Jenny. Chris, you talked about the bird that you shot the photo of. I mean, you've delved deeply into kind of the both the roots and the symptoms of our sustainability crisis. And I've often, when I've talked about it, thought of it like, that's like staring into the abyss, or I always talk about Alice in Wonderland, falling down that rabbit hole. And yet you face that, and you both obviously regularly focus on creative outlets that are somehow tied to that rabbit hole, that abyss. You focus on beauty, you focus on irony, on kind of this emotional, the feelings that you're talking about, Chris. I wonder if you can talk a bit about how you dealt with that paradox. How do you come from falling in that rabbit hole, sometimes for years, even decades, to coming up with the idea that beauty is one of the ways out, and feeling and connection to nature is one of the things that we really need to have in order to make this turn towards sustainability?
Well, for me, the key is in the experience of grief. And that was the heart of my 8-year project on Midway Island that resulted in my film called Albatross. And the thing that happened for me, I went to that island only interested in plastic. I had heard about the phenomenon of ocean plastic pollution, and I learned that there are dead birds on this remote island whose bodies are filled with plastic. And I went there only to photograph that. And it was a dark vision, a desire to look into an incredibly dark mirror. And what ended up happening for me is I just fell deeply, deeply in love with the birds. And I was with hundreds of them as they died, filled with plastic, right in front of them, because they have no fear of us. So I could get up literally inches away and film them, or just be with them as they choked to death or as they died from the toxicity. And every single time it happened, I poured with tears. And it happened so many times, it was kind of like Groundhog Day. Like, I began to have this, I noticed I was having this same experience over and over of this incredibly deep sadness for birds that I never thought of in my whole life up until I went to that island. Albatrosses were just not on my radar up until that moment. And it happened so many times, this experience over and over, that I began to have a perspective on the experience. And I started wondering, why does it affect me so much? It's like I'm crying at the level that I would cry if a family member died. And over again, I never got used to it. It never lessened in the profundity of the experience of that sadness. And I noticed each time that at the end, as the bird let go, I was still there. And the colors were incredibly vivid. And I felt this electric sense of my own aliveness. And the tears just poured and poured and poured. And it finally occurred to me, it was after, I don't know how many, it finally occurred to me, the reason I'm so affected is because I love them. And that was an incredibly liberating moment for me, because for my whole life, I'd always pushed grief away. And we all, I think, have so much grief for what is being lost. And if we push it to the side because we think that it's going to cause us to be depressed and just sad forever. And my relationship changed with grief. It's like grief is not the same as sadness. It's not the same as despair. It's not a bad experience. It's a doorway that takes us right home to the love that we are made of. And grief is love. That's what grief is, the feeling of love that we feel when we're losing something that we love. And to connect with grief, it's when we can see it that way and then experience it that way, it's no longer an abyss. It's no longer a trap door that leads to anxiety and depression and paralysis and bad experience. It's an ecstatic experience of incredibly deep connection with our home zone.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's interesting with that idea of paradox between grief and love. Jenny, please.
Yeah, I love that, Chris. Grief is love. I've never really thought, I certainly have experience with grief, and I've never really thought about it that way. It's sort of, and to apply it then to our environmental crises, it's sort of like an avenue to hope, you know, if you think about grief as love. So I really love that. I wrote that down. I'm going to make a note of that. But beauty, you know, when Rob said, oh, I want to do this panel on beauty and I want you to do it. And I thought, I don't really think that much about beauty, you know.
Uh-oh, we've got a freeze. That's perhaps the poignant end there, that Jenny doesn't think much about beauty. Well, hopefully she'll be unfrozen here in a minute. Sorry for technical problems, folks. Chris, I want to maybe, obviously we'll get back with you now that Jenny's frozen, but I wonder if you can talk about the moment of transformation for you. You know, you can talk more about that one, falling in love with the birds, or maybe another that basically puts you on this artistic path, you know, that, you know, I don't know if you were born an artist or if you became one, but even if you were born one, I suspect there were transformations along the way. So I was wondering, I just think that would be inspiring maybe to hear a little bit about your personal adventures of growing into an artist.
Well, thank you for that question. There's one moment I can look back on that was incredibly vivid, that happened on Midway Island as part of my Albatross project, that may be at least one of the most transformative moments of my life. And that was the moment that I accidentally killed a baby albatross myself. I had an accident on the island. It was on the trip when we were there, when all the babies were hatching from the eggs. And imagine this tiny island is covered with hundreds of thousands of bird nests, and they're all right on the ground, and they're everywhere. They're on the paths and in the road and just everywhere. And so you have to be really careful everywhere you go not to step on the nests. And I was riding my bike one day and I was looking to the side, was going through the forest, watching the trees pass, and I was imagining a video shot, and suddenly I felt a bump with my tire, and I looked down, I jumped off my bike, and I saw that I had just run over a baby albatross in its nest. And it was coughing up some orange liquid, and it tried to move its wings, and I saw that I had either broken its wings or probably broken its back with the weight of my tire. And it didn't die right away. It took 3 days for it to die. And I went and visited it each morning and each evening, and was just absolutely beside myself with the gravity of that inadvertent mistake for that creature. For me, it was an inadvertent mistake, and for that creature, it took everything. It took the entire universe away from that being. I could see that it's never going to fly. It's never going to take off and soar out over the Pacific, and it's never going to do its mating dance, and it's never going to have its babies. Wow, it's like 8 years later, and I still feel it. And the day the bird died, on the third day, when I found it dead, I just completely lost it. And we did a ceremony around the bird, and that's recorded in my film. And it was astonishing to me to see how much I loved that one bird, how much I felt for that one bird. And the transformative moment, the big shock came when, after the ceremony, after all the tears were gone, we walked from the forest back.
Oh, oh no. Chris warned us that winds in Patagonia were really high today and making some havoc with internet. I'm going to play some juggling here, it looks like.
You see me again?
Okay,
Rob?
hang on. Yeah, I see you, Jenny. Chris,
Okay.
you went out for a short bit there. So I wonder if you could just go back about 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, where was I?
Oh my gosh.
You were in the ceremony on the, that appeared in the film.
Oh, yeah. And at the end of that, we walked back out into the field of hundreds of thousands of birds. And I had this shocking realization that there was nothing about that baby bird that was more lovable or more magnificent or more worthy of love than all of them. And I realized that I loved them all that much. And I felt my heart kind of explode. And immediately after that came another level, which was there isn't anything about albatrosses that makes them more lovable than sea turtles or dolphins or any creature that walks or swims or flies in our world. And that was the experience that connected me with what my Buddhist friends mean when they say their love for all beings.
Yeah.
And it felt to me like something that was already there inside of me that I found, that I discovered. I believe it's a part of all of us. And if we could put more attention on how do we find and connect with and maintain our love for all beings, if we could collectively find our love for all beings, then we would walk through a door together into a completely different world, and solving all of these problems and doing the stuff that we know we ought to be doing would become easy and celebratory.
Yeah. Oh gosh, Chris, thanks for sharing such a heartfelt story and giving us the chance to kind of be there with you on it. Jenny, the question that I asked when you went out was, in your development as in your career as an artist, as or in your case, a creative provocateur, you've probably gone through some transformations, and I was wondering if you could just share a bit about your own personal journey that puts you on the path to doing what you do today.
Sure. Okay, so I don't get to complicate beauty.
Well, you are welcome to go to that piece as well.
I'm now on my phone because no, that's okay. That's okay. We'll go forward. But oh, actually, it's connecting me now. I'm going to come back on the laptop.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. This is the only time this ever happened to me that I just completely. I'm so sorry. This is the only time this ever happened to me that I just completely. Okay, I'm really sorry about that. Is everything okay now?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, well, just to start to connect with Chris, because I was going to complicate beauty, but then also come back and say that, because I think that beauty has been, if you think about, say, like farms, and my mother always says when we're driving through Illinois, oh my God, this is such a beautiful landscape. And I'm seeing pesticides and toxics and no insects dead on our windshield and, monocropping. And I think there is a kind of strong American tradition of using beauty to make history and toxicity invisible. So I think we just need to use that, with care, that's all. But also then to come back and say, I am a nature girl, and my entire journey starts, with the work that I do now, starts with being a nature girl and loving birds in particular, Chris. Actually, I'm a birder and have sort of gotten back more into it recently, and just connecting with that, as much as I critique the idea of thinking that there are these places out there, regardless, they are shaped by human experience, but that's okay. And there's still wonder, and there's beauty, and there's knowledge. A lot of people say knowledge is sort of the enemy of beauty and wonder, but I actually think the opposite. I think knowledge is only enhances the beauty and the wonder. And so that's really personally, you know, where I come from. I'm still avid hiker and a birder. But I think that for me, a couple of the rabbit holes I fell down that really, I thought I was going to be a writer and write sort of one 300-page book after another. And I've written one 300-page book and will never write another. And first was just I accidentally founded a public art collective, co-founded a public art collective, the LA Urban Rangers, which was just supposed to be this sort of little one-off project, and actually turned into a project that completely transformed my career and led me from using purely textual forms of creativity and art to really thinking about experiential art and the ways in which you could design projects that allowed people to experience new ideas, you know, as much as just let me get rid of this, to you know, telling them what the new ideas are. And that has informed my textual practices. So being an LA Urban Ranger and being Ranger Jenny on the Malibu Beaches and having to be really non-confrontational, you know, and really friendly, no matter what the homeowners were yelling at us, really informed the app that I did after that and the tone of the app, because I really, you know, saw what a kind of gentler tone could accomplish. At the same time, I'll just end with this, in the opposite direction, the book I've just published, Stop Saving the Planet, is a response to feeling like I couldn't get anywhere with a gentler tone, with this kind of tone that I used to have, like in 13 Ways of Seeing Nature in LA, which is an essay that has some of the same ideas, where it's more like, let's have a cup of tea and talk about this, you know, or let's go out for a beer and talk about this. And I'm like, I'm not getting through. I'm not getting through. People think I'm saying the opposite of what I'm saying. And so it's sort of the opposite of what I just said. What I learned from being wearing the hat is I've also moved into, you know, been trying a different kind of voice that's, you know, so the experience of feeling like I'm just not getting through really informed the most recent project that I did, which is more fist shaking.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I'm finding you two very inspiring. I think our audience is as well. I do want to turn a little bit to the effects of your work and the kind of the activism side. Rob,
before we go there, can I turn us in a little direction for a second?
Sure.
Something that Jenny said that just lit me up is, it feels to me, I want to go deeper into what is beauty. Because I think there's an idea out there that beauty is this kind of aesthetic experience that's sort of like sugary icing on a cake. And how is that powerful, and why is it even relevant? And beauty, to me, it's something that we can cultivate and grow the collective idea of what it is. And Jenny, when you said that knowledge can inform beauty and amplify beauty, I was like, yes. And it popped in an experience that I would love to relate of to me, what is beauty? Here's my definition of beauty: is standing in a forest, but it doesn't have to be like a national park kind of forest. It can be a degraded forest. It can be a city park, some trees in a city park. And I think of everything I know about cellular biology. We all know something about cells, how big they are and how complex they are and all the stuff that's going on in every cell. And we know how tiny they are. And sort of take into account everything we know about cells, and we're looking at one leaf on a tree. And we know that in a single leaf, there are more cells than there are humans on Earth. And that they're all somehow working together and cooperating, and there's more and more evidence that they're communicating in ways that are mysterious to us. And we know that trees have roots, and everything we know about tree roots, we're learning more and more from science that tree roots contain all of the chemicals associated with consciousness. Serotonin, dopamine, all of the exact chemicals that we have in our brain that we associate with consciousness are in the roots of plants. And we know that. And a single leaf, we know that it has highways of transportation of all kinds of materials. This incredibly complex, like a whole civilization happening inside a single leaf. And that's just what we know from what we learn in science. And then zoom back a little bit at an entire tree, and it's like, oh my God, look at this. It's a civilization beyond comprehension in its complexity and enormity. It's like standing in front of an uber alien city. And then we take into account everything that we don't know about the biology of what happens in a tree. It's like this absolutely amazing being, a single tree. And if we're then standing in front of an entire forest, it's like, oh my God, how could this be? What a miracle. And then we just take a moment and go, okay, wait a second, what's actually happening here right now? I'm a conscious being, whoa, and I'm beholding this miracle in front of me, and I happen to be standing on a planet, and we think of everything that we know about planets and everything we've learned about from astronomy and cosmology about the enormity of the universe that we're in. And really, there's no other appropriate response than to just fall on our knees in pure amazement with a gasp of like, oh, that to me is the experience of beauty. It's not some aesthetic thing from paintings in the 1600s. It's a spiritual connection with the reality of our world. And that's a kind of beauty. It's so powerful. And that I want to infuse the environmental movement with that kind of beauty. And that's a way that scientists can help out us artists just by celebrating the amazingness of all the stuff that they're studying.
Thanks. Thank you for.
I want to hear Jenny complicate beauty. I'm really interested in what that is.
I agree, Jenny. What's your follow-on to that?
So yeah, I mean, so I'm a little suspicious of beauty because of the long tradition, American tradition of, beauty of getting rid of things that are deemed ugly, right? But also the way in which beauty hides history and connections, but also getting rid of things that we think are ugly, which has a lot to do with displacement of populations in the past, displacement of indigenous communities, displacement of communities of color, right? But at the same time, I think I actually want to talk about more like beauty as possibility, because I'm someone who, so my autobiography is I grew up as a nature girl. I wanted to like live in the outback in Alaska and grow my own wheat and grind it and make my own flour. And that's what I thought I was going to do. And where do I end up? Venice Beach in Los Angeles, right? Because I make the mistake of going to graduate school and I start thinking and complicating these ideas about nature and beauty and environment. And I'll study with Bill Cronin, who's one of the main people who has done that. And but it was perfect for me. And so I end up in Los Angeles, which I think is really great. I end up really interested in urban nature. And I end up spending a lot of my time in Los Angeles working on the LA River, and the LA River becomes one of my absolute favorite places in the world. So, the LA River to me is the first time I saw it, which was about a year after I moved to LA, I just thought, there are places where you just think, this is an important place. Like, I don't know why, but this is an important place and I need to figure out why, and I think for me, the part of the beauty and attraction of the LA River is the possibility inherent in the LA River. Well, first of all, it's full of birds. I mean, even the concrete places are full of birds that are just, finding the least little bits of green there. Like, no one told the birds that this is no longer a river, right? They still think it's a river. And also, just the possibility that you can see, like, this is a place that has been, that the way that we have managed this place has created so many problems and so many inequities. And that means that there's a tremendous amount of possibility here, right? Because something that is so deeply implicated in troubles that are so deep is also a place of tremendous possibility. Like if you can revitalize this river, you can actually do a lot in Los Angeles. At the moment, I will say, I think it's becoming a giant gentrification project, which is a little bit disappointing, but it still remains, you know, a landscape of real possibility, I think. So I think, you know, maybe, Chris, we can also think of beauty that way as kind of the possibility, and just seeing the beauty of the history that has taken place there. And, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if we can build on these ideas of beauty and possibility a little bit. I mean, Chris, you said that infusing the environmental movement with the kind of beauty that you're describing is a key to changing the conversation there. Jenny, you're talking about a river that is the victim of serious violence and has a kind of a trauma history at this point, but it still flows, it still provides, it is still habitat, it's still part of the ecosystem, and there's a possibility in that. And that's it kind of brings me to, okay, how are we going to infuse those kinds of ideas into the environmental movement? I found this really cool quote from William Burroughs, who said, "Artists are the architects of real change, not the political legislators who implement change after the fact." So it's kind of, you know, saying you too and your kind are on the leading edge of changing these conversations. So I'm wondering, you know, when you're doing your work, are you trying with intention to instigate people to embrace the ideas that you've got, or are you kind of just doing what's in your heart and seeing what emerges?
No, I tend to be, I think I'm a little bit unusual, because I think more artists, I would say, see what you have to say, Chris, are a little bit more towards, let's see what emerges. I tend to be more instrumental, honestly. I'll just say that a little sheepishly. With my, I think, approach to art, I really love art that aims to have an impact and aims to actually make a difference on the ground, and that doesn't, you know, so I'm happiest. And I think for me, part of it is I think sometimes artists, they stand apart very, very intentionally. They're like, well, we're not part of, you know, capitalist economy. We're not part of this, we're not part of that. And, you know, we're purer than that somehow. But I am happiest when my art projects make their way into public decision making. So for example, with the LA Urban Rangers, we were doing these Malibu public beach safaris, and we were taking people down and having skills enhancing activities for how to find and use a public beach, because Malibu public beach going is not public beach going 101. It's actually really, really hard to use these public beaches that are lined with private development. And eventually the real rangers, the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, which is a super out of the box thinking, incredible parks agency here in the LA area, they got in touch with us and said, I was actually thinking about getting in touch with them, and said, no, they'll think we're making fun of them, whatever. They got, the head of it, they got in touch with us and said, hey, we really love what you're doing. Do you want to funding? You know, so then the real rangers funded the fake rangers to do some projects, and then eventually actually hired the fake rangers to sort of show them what we were doing, because they have some beaches down there. And that's when and then they were using our Malibu Public Beaches brochure, like to show their trustees and their committee, you know, when they would have meetings of the board, to show them, okay, like here's what's going on the ground, you know, actually using our materials, which are very ironic, but also very factual. So that's what makes me happiest. You know, if you look at what's happening on the LA River, it was started by artists when nobody took them seriously at all, just thought they were totally crazy. And eventually within about, that was in 1985, eventually within about 15 years, every single public player who could possibly be working to revitalize the LA River was revitalizing the LA River. And artists are still really, really involved. I'm actually thinking with a friend about an art project that might challenge the gentrification that's going on there. But, so yeah, I like intentional, impactful, and I know that makes me very not very artist sounding, but I'm just going to admit it, and yeah, and say what I do.
I think it's quite okay and desirable that you're an instigator, Jenny. Chris, yeah, what about your methods there of changing the conversation?
Well, my process is basically I only know when I'm working on a project after quite a long time of photographing something, and then suddenly I realize I've been photographing that thing for a while, or I have a lot of photographs, because I'm always photographing everything, and suddenly I notice, oh, I've been photographing feathers lately on the ground. Okay, maybe that's a project. And so I never sit down and think, okay, I'm doing this project, and then I go do it. It's something I feel like I follow around behind my camera and things just emerge. And it's very often a really strange experience of having no idea why I'm taking the pictures that I'm taking. And I have active voices inside of me that tell me that's totally cliche or dumb. It's never going to be anything. What a waste of time. And I have to just kind of constantly be clearing that space and keep on photographing whatever the thing is. And it's only after a long time that what it means or what its relevance or what is its significance for me kind of emerges on its own and teaches itself to me. And one of my deep beliefs is in following these very personal, individual, kind of private threads of interest. Because I can't remember who it was that said this to me, but it was many years ago. Somebody said that the more personal you can get with your work, the more individual and personal, then it's like shaped like an hourglass. It drops out into the universal. And it's been many times astonishing for me to follow a thread that just feels like it's going absolutely nowhere except my own exploration of something, and to suddenly discover that it has a kind of poetic, more universal meaning. And that's happening to me right now with my work photographing, making long exposures of moving water. And I've been doing this, and it just feels like so irrelevant and so cliche all this time, but I just keep going and going and going. And now birds have come in to these images, and I'm coming full circle. The cormorants here are very much like albatrosses. And I find myself in love with this population of birds, and I'm photographing them again. And it's like that came to me. It wasn't something that I made or that I thought of or that I invented at all.
Yeah, almost more like a channel for the universe.
And can I just say, Rob, too, and Chris, that, yeah, I definitely, I think, you have to start with something you're passionate about, and that makes sense to you. Absolutely. And it's also really impossible to predict what your projects are going to do. I mean, I wonder if that was true, because I think your albatross photos have had such an impact. Actually, they've really had, I think, a big on the ground impact in terms of getting people to focus on the plastics issue. But who knows, right? You just put that stuff out there in the universe. So I've had projects I thought were going to change the world just sort of fizzled, just people didn't find them, compelling. And then I've had projects like the Our Malibu Beaches app, where like it was just supposed to be this little one-off side project, and it's probably made more.
Oh no.
Oh,
Frozen again. Gosh, well, I was really loving hearing kind of how you all are building on these ideas and turning them into works that you then put out into the world. And we only have a couple of minutes left, and I was wondering if you might end with something you can tell our audience. I think we're all artists at heart to some degree, but not all of us are confident enough to go out and do what you do. But I wonder if you could offer some thoughts or encouragement about how we could, those of us that maybe are more artistically challenged, could get involved to change the environmental conversation?
You know, Rob, from my own point of view, it's like we don't all have to be artists, and we don't even have to think creatively. It's like I think we're all naturally creative, but the idea that, like, I want to do something artistic but I don't know what to do, it can be intimidating.
Yeah.
And so to me, I encourage people to let go of needing to do something creative. And instead, there's one thing that we all have access to, an infinite ocean of it available to us all the time, and that is love. That's our innate state of being, is to be in love with life and with each other. And if we can just connect with that, like make a practice of connecting with that, then everything else will follow. Everything else will happen automatically by itself.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Jenny, you're back. You can hear it.
I'm going to stay on my phone. This is weird. It's never happened to me, and now it's happened twice. So I'm going to stay on my phone.
Well, yeah, I wanted to give you a chance to finish your thought here. We're very close to the ending time.
Okay. Yeah. No. I was just talking about how frustrated I am with it.
Your audio was breaking up a little bit, but I think
Rob,
I caught
are you
it that outcomes and this whole notion that we have to have specific outcomes is frustrating and probably can keep some of the arts creativity from being out there on the scene and being where it ought to be. Well, you know, I would love to just stay on and keep coming up with more and more threads and ideas with the two of you. I really love your work. I love the emotion and the content and the intelligence that you bring to this conversation. I encourage everyone, obviously, to check out Jenny and Chris's work. We're going to include links to their websites in our list of resources, and they've also provided us with a bunch of other places that you can go and be inspired. And if you like today's event and the other content we produce at Post Carbon Institute, please consider supporting our work by becoming a donor. If you become a monthly donor, you can actually get complimentary access to future versions of our Take Action series like this one. And we'll do our best to keep bringing you the best content and ideas that we can come up with. And also, if you're not already receiving notifications from Post Carbon Institute, please do sign up for our mailing list so you'll get notified of events like this. And I'd really like to encourage everyone to find ways to change the conversation, do something to create beauty, maybe a new definition of beauty for some of us that have been listening today, to do that in your part of the world. And thanks again so much, Chris, Jenny, the team at Post Carbon Institute, and all of you who support our work. Really, really wonderful to be with you today.